Our timekeeper that was here yesterday is doing something else. So I guess I have to be the bad guy because please sit down. We have to try to slip another speaker in here and because we want the message to be heard. I know. Ring the bell. Ring the. Where's Marie? We need Marie right now. Get everybody in their seats.
The drill sergeant.
Stay over here.
Those are golden left them for.
I want to introduce our next speaker, Tim Madigan. When we did the research, we got a response. In the cool connection, I mean, I thought I'd do something about Mural. Do something about history. But when Tim wrote back and he said that Fredrick Douglass, who happens to be in Charlie's painting down there, and we saw him in the mural earlier, was in Ireland for 2 years?
About 5 months. He was in the United Kingdom for 2 years.
Okay, so he was in Ireland for 5 months. And I'll let Tim finish it, but it was so inspiring to see. This is not before. This was before we didn't have airlines to jump upon. Then we had to take time. He's over there inspiring the English and the people from Ireland. So what a great story, and we're going to learn about this connection, that global connection to our icon figure, Fredrick Douglass from the area. So thank you, Tim, for being part of this great celebration.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello. So, as Mark mentioned, this is a kind of serendipitous talk. I gave a presentation at the Rochester Public Library a few months ago on Douglass's visit to Ireland, and some of the attendees told me about this conference. So I contacted Mark and said, you know, there are two very interesting murals to Fredrick Douglass, one in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and another in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And I thought you might be interested to hear a little bit about that. So I'm the director of the Irish Studies program at St. John Fisher College, not too far from the hotel here. I'm sure you're all familiar with the great Fredrick Douglass, who spent many years of his life here in Rochester and is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. Most people, including myself, did not know that the young Fredrick Douglass, when he was around 27, spent time in the United Kingdom and began in Ireland. And the reason was he had written his autobiography because he was already a very prominent abolitionist. And many people before that said this man could not possibly have been a former slave. He's too educated, he's a shill, and the abolitionists have just hired an actor. And so Douglass wrote his autobiography to prove that he had been a slave in Massachusetts, in Maryland rather, and had escaped, went to Massachusetts as a young man. And unfortunately, in so doing, he named who his former slave owner had been, and the laws of the time in the U.S. said that anyone could grab him and get a reward for bringing him back into slavery. And so the abolitionists in the United States contacted people in the United Kingdom and arranged for him to go there. One thought was he would spend the rest of his life in the United Kingdom and that his wife and children would eventually join him. Now, again, Douglass is one of our great heroes here, as well as Susan B. Anthony. This is across from the Susan B. Anthony house here in Rochester. I barged in between them. They were having nice tea before I made my way there. And I've always had a great interest in Douglass, and I had to say, it was only in 2012, when I was asked to be the head of the Irish Studies program, that I learned he'd spent any time in Ireland. And I said, you know, I've read biographies of Douglass. Why didn't I know this? And I took the biographies off my shelf, and it said that from 1845 to 1847, he spent 2 years in the United Kingdom. Now, what today is the Republic of Ireland was then part of the United Kingdom, but when I read UK, I don't think of Ireland. And so I became quite fascinated with learning, well, why did he go there and what happened to him when he was there? And I actually met Frederick Douglass. I went back in time, it took a lot of effort. This is actually my friend David Anderson, who is a professor at Nazareth College and a great Douglass expert. And he and I put together a conference at my college in 2013 about Douglass's trip to Ireland. So it says here, in 1845, Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave who had recently penned his autobiography and feared being recaptured and sent back into slavery, was invited by the leaders of the worldwide abolitionist movement to come to Ireland, Scotland, and England to lecture. He spent nearly a year in Ireland, visiting such cities as Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Waterford, and Belfast. While there, he befriended Daniel O'Connell, the political leader and orator famed for winning Catholic civil rights in the United Kingdom. During his time in Ireland, Douglass came to feel for the first time that he was truly accepted as a human being, and he was inspired to devote the remainder of his long life to the cause of human emancipation and the abolition of slavery. So he wrote letters back to William Lloyd Garrison and other abolitionist leaders in the United States, saying things like, "I find myself treated as a man, not a color." It was his first time outside the United States, and he realized at this point that the fight to abolish slavery was part of a greater battle going on throughout the world, the fight for human emancipation. Daniel O'Connell had a tremendous influence upon him. They met in Dublin. It was towards the end of O'Connell's long and active life. And there's a story which some say is true, some say isn't true, but it should be true, even if it's not, that when Douglass met O'Connell, he knew that O'Connell, in addition to being a great advocate for Catholic emancipation, was also a great opponent of slavery. And that whenever O'Connell would meet someone from the United States, he would ask them where they stood on the slavery issue, and if they were pro-slavery, he would refuse to shake their hand. And he would not take any money for the causes that he was involved in if it was somehow related to slavery. And so Douglass is said to have, when he met O'Connell, said, "My master hated you, and therefore I love you." Now, I don't know if that was true, but it apparently was true that Douglass started to be referred to while in Ireland as the Black O'Connell. And he finally decided that he needed to come back to the United States to devote himself to the cause of ending slavery in the U.S. Fortunately for him, people in the United Kingdom, including Ireland, raised funds and actually paid for his freedom. And so he moved back, initially went back to New England, but then decided shortly thereafter, around 1848, to move here to Rochester, New York, where he started his famous newspaper, the North Star. Now, this is a fellow, Don Mullen, who lives in Dublin. He's a peace activist internationally, and he's started something called the Daniel O'Connell Frederick Douglass Project, and the purpose of which is to not just commemorate the meeting of these two great individuals, but to use their friendship as a kind of inspiration for peace activist causes in the present day. And this is a wonderful statue that he was involved with putting together that shows what Douglass would have looked like in 1845, the time in which he was in Ireland. We usually think of Douglass as a distinguished-looking elderly gentleman with great white hair, but we tend to forget what a imposing figure he was in his youth. And the great cape there is actually based on Daniel O'Connell, who was famous for his dramatic gestures. The two of them were tremendous orators. And one of the things that Don Mullen has been involved with is organizing events throughout the world, again, using the O'Connell-Douglass connection. So I learned through Mullen that there was a mural. You're wondering what the mural connection is. That there was a mural to Douglass in Belfast, Northern Ireland, one of the cities that he had visited in 1845. And it says, inspired by two Irishmen to escape from slavery He was working on the docks in Maryland when two Irish workers said, why don't you just get out of here? You know, why don't you go up north where you could be free? Frederick Douglass came to Ireland during the famine. It was very interesting. He, by coincidence, happened to be in Ireland when the Great Famine began and wrote some of the earliest reports about the suffering he saw there. Henceforth, he championed the abolition of slavery, women's rights, and Irish freedom. It's unknown that, in fact, up until the end of his life in the 1890s, Douglass was a supporter of home rule and the freedom of Ireland to become at least semi-independent from England. So I wanted to see this monument, this mural, and I happened to be in Belfast, actually in 2012, and I met this gentleman, the Reverend Bill Shaw, Order of the British Empire. He is a Presbyterian minister, tremendous man who has been doing very important work trying to bring Catholic and Protestant youths together in Belfast. There's still tremendous segregation based on religious differences, economic and social differences, even long after the peace accord. And he, as you can see, is a great admirer of Douglass as well, so I took him to see the Douglass gravesite in Mount Hope Cemetery. But a few months earlier, he had taken me to see the mural in Belfast. Now, you may notice this mural doesn't look very much like the previous mural. And he was as surprised as I was, because I showed him the picture that I had. I said, this is from Belfast, Northern Ireland. He said, well, I know this mural. I see it every day, and the one you've shown me it resembles the mural. I mean, the picture of Douglass certainly looks similar, but as you can see here, it's much more detailed. There are many other great abolitionists and civil rights advocates pictured on the mural. And by the way, this is on the Falls Road in Belfast, and you can't perhaps see it very well here, but this is barbed wire on the top of the wall. And this is near what are called one of the peace walls. And at night, these walls are closed so that the Protestants and Catholics on each side don't attack each other. There are still bottles and other sorts of things tossed all the time right here. So there's a certain irony, perhaps, that these are called peace walls when there's still so much tension there. And again, this is the gate that is closed every night still. I was just in Belfast about a year or so ago. And again, you can see it's a really wonderful mural. I don't know that this does get a good enough impression. You see Angela Davis, this is Daniel O'Connell, Nelson Mandela, Bob Marley, Martin Luther King. This is the Reverend Shaw there to give you a sense of the scale of this mural, which again was much, much larger than the one I was expecting to see. But I learned the story of what was happening, because shortly thereafter, another friend of mine who lives near New Bedford, Massachusetts, said, you know, we have a mural honoring Douglass here. New Bedford was where he escaped from slavery as a young man, and this too is a mural. You know, the portrait of Douglass is identical to the one you saw earlier in Belfast, and this is actually a mural honoring not only abolitionists but labor rights. And so I did some research to try to find out what was happening. Turned out that this mural was painted in 2001. It was commissioned by the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities, along with local labor unions and the historical societies in the area. And I suddenly, you know, I'm a professor of philosophy, so I'm always wondered about solving mysteries. I said, well, what is the connection here between that first mural in Belfast that doesn't seem to exist anymore, the one that I saw, and the one here in New Bedford? There's got to be a solution. And I found the answer. I contacted Don Mullen, because I figured, well, he must know. He's connected with all these individuals. And he said, you got to contact a fellow named Bill Ralston. Bill is a professor of sociology at the University of Ulster. And he has written several tremendous books, which those of you interested in murals must get your hands on the murals of Northern Ireland. going back to the Troubles and earlier. Many of these murals are deeply disturbing. They're very militaristic. Many of them honor those who have been killed on both the Protestant and Catholic side in Northern Ireland. But as he pointed out, since 1998 and the Good Friday Peace Accords, many of the murals now are changing and are becoming more peace-oriented and more international. And I met with him, and he took me to, again, to the mural that I had seen previously, and he solved the problem. He said, well, the reason all of these murals look similar is they were painted by the same man, Danny Devaney. And Danny Devaney happens to be a former IRA prisoner. He spent several years in Longcash Prison, a pretty horrific place, and was very active during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. But since his release and since the peace accords, he has dedicated himself to the cause of peace activism. And he is one of the best known muralists in Northern Ireland as well as the Republic and indeed internationally. And everyone I met in Belfast knows him as Danny D. So if you ask for Danny Devaney, they said, well, who's that? I said, how about Danny D? Oh yeah, the muralist, you know, of course. And so Bill, who's of course very close to him, introduced the two of us, and there we are posing at his mural. I'm very proud to say, by the way, the Reverend Shaw had given me a button earlier honoring Frederick Douglass that he had bought at Strawberry Fields in Central Park. Somebody honoring Frederick Douglass in New York City. The Reverend Shaw from Belfast gave me the button, which I then wore in Belfast. I said, this just gives you a sign of the international importance of this great man, Frederick Douglass. So let me just jump back a step here. So essentially, Danny Devaney explained what had happened. He said that he had been commissioned to do the mural in New Bedford and was very successful. And then 5 years later, in 2006, there was something called the West Belfast Festival, in which he decided that he would replicate the New Bedford mural in Belfast. And the mural was there for a few years, but the tradition in Belfast is to paint over the murals because there's limited space, and many of them are almost like newspaper accounts. And so the mural that I had seen the photo of no longer existed. And he said around 2009 or 2010, he got a call from Jerry Adams, the head of Sinn Féin, who he knows very well. Jerry Adams said, I'm in the White House meeting with President Obama, and he's going to be coming to Belfast, and I told him about your mural, and he wants to see it. And Danny said, Jerry, it's gone. And there was a pause on the line, and then Adams said, put it back.
No kidding.
And so not only did he put it back with a vengeance. So the one you saw earlier is much larger, much more detailed, much more dedicated not just to Douglass, although he certainly dominates the frame, but to many other great activists for human emancipation. But what's particularly interesting, when Danny painted the mural the second time, he didn't do it alone. He did it with a team of muralists, one of whom is a fellow named Mark Irvine. And Mark Irvine, during the Troubles, spent many years in prison as a activist for the Protestant side. So the two of them now, along with other, again, former enemies, have dedicated themselves to the use of art as a way of bringing about reconciliation. And I'm truly amazed at the story itself. And again, anyone who's interested, I'd be happy to give you further details on Bill Ralston, who's written extensively on this. But I wanted to close talking about serendipity by mentioning that, to me, this is an ongoing project. It's wonderful that New Bedford and West Belfast have murals honoring Douglass, but I would love to see a third mural here in our city of Rochester. I know that some of the murals that we're talking about the earlier project.
We'll take care of it.
Yeah, and that's why when I said these
Somebody
are the
will.
people. So this is a group of dignitaries and myself in Waterford, in the Republic of Ireland. Waterford is the sister city of Rochester, and I've been there many times, and I'm very happy that in 2003 a group of visitors from Rochester, as well as some dignitaries from Waterford, put a plaque honoring Frederick Douglass's visit to that city in 1845. He spoke at the City Hall, which is a magnificent building. That's what they call the Blue Plaque Program, which honors historically important events in Waterford. And I always tell people the reason they put me in the middle is not because I'm the most important, but they weren't sure how well that plaque was fastened. I was the most expendable if it fell and hit me, but it's still there. I was actually there just a month or so ago, and it's still affixed to the wall. And I thought, you know, in and of itself, it's great that Waterford, our sister city, honors Douglass, who was one of our great heroes from Rochester. But lo and behold, I was being driven around and I saw these beautiful murals throughout the city of Waterford. And I asked, you know, what's going on here? And they said, well, this is the second year in a row that Waterford has sponsored something called Waterford Walls, the purpose of which, not unlike the talk we just heard previously, is to take buildings that are abandoned or that are sort of eyesores and have artists create works of art to kind of revitalize the city. Waterford has a lot of similarities to Rochester, just as we're still coming out of the travails of Kodak and Xerox. The Waterford Crystal Factory closed about 10 years ago, and the economic hit there was tremendous, as well as the general collapse of the Irish economy. But there's a lot of inspired hope going on in Waterford, and so I contacted the organizers of this event and told them that I was coming here and I was going to learn more about the interest here in international murals, and particularly the connection with a kind of a therapeutic or inspirational aspect. So I'm hoping, in a sense, to be kind of a matchmaker, that Waterford and the people involved with that project will stay in touch with all of you, and that perhaps down the line maybe this event can take place in Waterford as well. So I'll just close that saying Douglass lives on. This is one of his great statements. You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man. And the more I learn about Frederick Douglass, the more impressed I am. He's one of these historic figures that you think you know a lot about, and you see statues and you say, oh yeah, that person. But the fact that right up until the end of his life, he was so politically active. One of the words or phrases he got from Daniel O'Connell that he would use at the end of his life, when people would ask, what should I do? He would say, agitate, agitate, agitate. Never rest. There's never a time when the cause of human emancipation can be taken for granted. And 2018 is going to be the 200th anniversary of Douglass's birth, although he himself wasn't really sure when he was born, as was the case with many slaves, but that 1818 is the year that is generally given. And so I'm working with Don Mullen and with some other individuals to have a follow-up conference here in Rochester honoring Douglass on the 200th anniversary of his birth. And one goal I would like to see, which I think is a realistic one, is for us to have a mural honoring Douglass done by Danny Devaney and some of his associates. It so happened, when I met Danny, I said, well, I'm from Rochester, New York, and you know, a lot of people, whenever you go to Ireland or Northern Ireland, you say you're from New York, they say, I've got a cousin in the Bronx, you know. So I said, from upstate New York. And he said, oh, I know where Rochester is. My daughter spent a summer there, because we have a program here, the Irish Children's Program, where we bring young people from Northern Ireland to spend a few weeks in the summer. And I took that again as, I don't know if it was divine inspiration or maybe the inspiration of Frederick Douglass, but the fact that Devaney already has a connection here. So again, for those of you so interested in the cause of murals and helping to use art as a way not just to honor the past, but to inspire the current generations and hope for the future, this is a project that I would be very interested in working with all of you on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm a professor, so I try to stay within my time.
Well, thank you very much. The bell hasn't quite gone yet, but there's a book from our Carl Schutz that
Oh, wonderful.
how he started Mural Magic. So
Great.
we're going to have Susan B. Anthony's happen, and so will Frederick Douglass.
And I have to say, I'm very interested to hear Peter Jemison as well, because
Yes.
just mentioning him, a lot of my colleagues at Fisher I know are working closely with them, and I'm hoping to be able to do so as well.